Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Maybe the most dangerous political comment in a generation, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, Donald Trump, or as he refers to himself in the third person, Donald J. Trump, J for John, has decided now that picking on Mexicans, picking on women, picking on Jews, picking on countless different groups is not enough. He's decided now to suggest that we should, or not we, the U.S. ought to ban all Muslims from entering the U.S. His comments have met with widespread condemnation from the UN, from Muslim leaders, Democrats and Republicans. Trump has said Muslims, many of them, quote, nurse a hatred toward the U.S. Now, other candidates have responded. Jeb Bush has said Trump is unhinged. Even former Vice President Dick Cheney says, quote, it goes against everything we stand for and believe in. The White House under Obama says this should disqualify Trump from running. The UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, says it's concerned that the rhetoric is putting the resettlement program at risk for Muslim refugees. But it might be getting widespread support. Another frontrunner, Dr. Carson, Ben Carson, he's not necessarily condemning what Trump has said. And just a minute ago, AP is reporting that Donald Trump plans to visit the Kingdom of Jordan in December, this month. Can you imagine the reception that Trump is going to get there after these kind of comments? Ted Cruz has praised Trump for standing up and focusing American attention on the need to secure our borders. But he disagrees with the policy. I mean, it's unbelievable. Marco Rubio called them offensive and outlandish. Ted Cruz was pretty mild, wasn't he? Not my policy. That's it. Hillary Clinton, reprehensible, prejudiced, and divisive. But Trump is still the front runner in the race. How do Muslim leaders across Canada react when they hear this? Can you imagine, as I said earlier, if Trump had said that about Jews? No Jews allowed. No blacks allowed. No Christians allowed. No homosexuals allowed. Outrage would ensue. And yet he remains the front runner. Mohamed El Rashidy, human rights and civil liberties lawyer, and Rabia Khedr from the Federation of Muslim Women join me now.
How you doing, Evan?
And you know, it's Mohamed. It's just almost you almost never believe this is a mainstream political view, but it has become that. What was your reaction when you heard Donald Trump say this?
No, Evan, it is mainstream, as you put it. Without a doubt, it's mainstream. I think it's very important for us to stop dealing with these incidents every time they happen as some kind of aberration or exceptional comment. It is exceptional historically to have reached this level of racism, at least publicly, by a public official. This is the first time that I could find, and that many other scholars have looked into this, that they were able to find a political figure take a stance that is this extreme against an identifiable group. That is, we're calling it racism because that's sort of lay people's terms for it, but it's discrimination based on religion. So I don't find it shocking in the sense that this is very much part of the discourse that is taking place right now in the U.S. and to a lesser extent in Canada. This is part of the discussion. It's just shocking that a presidential candidate, mind you, a leader in the Republican Party, would come out and say it.
Rabia, what was your reaction when you heard this?
I'm disgusted. I'm not surprised, however. I will agree with Mohamed there. This is historic. It's deeply rooted. It's just come to surface in this way, and I would almost say thank you, Donald, for saying what many Americans, I believe, actually think and believe. That's why he's still the front runner. I would hate for Canada to go down this road. I think we've already sort of expressed our viewpoints through our recent federal election that we're against this sort of divisive nonsense, that this goes against Canadian values, and I hope we remain true to that.
But what does it say? And I think it's very different in Canada. We just had an election where we talked about the niqab, but this is of a tenor, Mohamed, that is so much different than our debate. I mean, this is a guy who potentially could be the Republican nominee for the presidency, and he's saying this kind of thing. And I guess the question is, does this? I mean, we'll find out. But what if this doesn't hurt his cause? What does that tell us?
I actually haven't. Rabia is correct. This isn't going to hurt his cause. I don't think that within his base, for example, this is going to hurt his cause. People are not going to disown him. I think the Republican Party, given its historic position as one of two major parties in the United States, I think it's shameful. I think it's a black mark. But I don't think that the Trump brand is going to suffer from this. And that is exactly the point here, is to say, look, we have reached that level of discrimination against this particular group. Particularly, Evan, when you see the grounds on which he's using this. This is another mass shooting in the United States. It's very tragic, as always. Everybody from coast to coast, certainly around the world, is condemning it. Every nation state, certainly not terrorist groups necessarily, but every nation state is condemning it. And so you have, what, is this the 355th mass shooting? And yet somehow we're still able to vilify Muslims as the group that's responsible for a very big problem in the United States. And as long as this narrative, Evan, where the attacks on Muslims continue to happen in the discourse without any kind of voice fighting back, without any kind of rationale or reason to bring numbers and facts into whatever issue is being discussed, this hate mongering is going to continue and the rhetoric is going to increase. And now I don't know, I don't know what the next level would be. I guess the next level would be internment camp type of proposition.
Well, he talked about that. Trump actually said this is like Roosevelt's policy, and obviously referring to the Japanese internment, which we've already heard some mayors in Virginia talk about it as a smart policy. Rabia, interesting that on CNN tonight, Ben Carson, who's one of the other front runners, says he doesn't agree with Trump now. He says that's not who we are, and he said Trump's proposal is unconstitutional to discriminate based on religion. Now, I wonder, what does it say that Trump is getting widespread condemnation? He's condemnation from almost all the other Republican potential candidates or potential leaders. Obviously, condemnation from the White House and the Democratic candidates, and widespread condemnation around the world. What does that tell you?
That tells me that we're still very prepared to give the right messages, the politically correct messages. However, you made historic references here to the Japanese internment camps. History repeats itself. When you demonize and dehumanize a group, and American politics works on heroes and villains, sort of staged, on the Hollywood platform. And the villains today are depicted as Muslims, whether it's through media, through entertainment, through, the butt of the average email joke. So when this is the culture, this is the climate, these types of remarks from Mr. Trump are expected and will, in fact, fuel the fire of racism that's overflowing. It's just, raging in America right now.
Where's the line, though, Rabia? I mean, and we've spoken about this together on this program, the three of us. But where's the line? Because there's going to be legitimate political debates about the fight against ISIS and about militant jihadism, Islamism, and these distinctions. Where is the line between a pragmatic conversation about that a pragmatic conversation about those inspired by that twisted ideology and where it becomes xenophobia and racism?
I think we've crossed that line. I think we've certainly crossed that line, and the West has to revisit its foreign policy and admit that it's a failure. It's a failure, and now it's hitting our core values as Western societies, as Western civilizations, where it's actually going to destabilize our core with this kind of racist rhetoric now emerging from leading figures.
Yeah, but I could go on, obviously, in support of Rabia's position on the foreign policy aspect, but to address domestically where the line is to be drawn, I think making the argument that there is a problem with extremism in certain pockets of Muslim countries or Muslim societies or whatever areas you're discussing, whether it be in Iraq as a country or Syria or a war zone or not. Or
more problematically for the U.S. and Canada, an ally like Saudi Arabia.
Right. That's one discussion to be had, and that there's nothing wrong with addressing that. The problem is when you start to generalize, and of course we've discussed this many times, but when you use the brush of terrorism and really use the term terrorist interchangeably with Muslim, and then you start to have these positions of banning all Muslims, and Muslims are bad, and as Rabia said, the hero and the villain concept. Once you go down that road, it's a very slippery slope, and we're at it. I don't think from a legal standpoint there's any danger here. That's what the courts are for, and this is, the protection against the tyranny of the majority and so on. Every Supreme Court, every federal court judge, everybody's going to strike anything like that down. This doesn't have any. This isn't going to come to fruition. What Donald Trump is saying, but it is very dangerous because of his position. And when you look at the real discussions that should be taking place, if he has a problem with borders, the United States has over 13 million what they call illegal aliens. That is, people who entered the country without any checks or any documents being checked whatsoever. And so for you to turn an important discussion about that topic and focus on one particular group when you have porous borders is very problematic. And then again, with mass shootings, it's the same thing, that you're taking these small issues. You're taking something very small, a small community, and you're using it as a scapegoat for much larger issues that you're not willing to deal with.
Well, listen,
and Evan, I think we can take it further there and even say that by him making these kinds of remarks, he's also fueling radicalization on all fronts.
Well, that's Absolutely. What some think, that he's playing into the ISIS narrative, that the world is against Muslims, and that could be a recruitment tool.
That's one piece, but he is also playing into propagating hate and inspiring folks like the KKK who will feel that they're superior and everybody else should be eliminated.
Now, what do you think of, there's some reaction here in Canada. A counselor in Toronto, a guy named Josh Matlow, and he's in Ward 22, has called, in reaction to the Trump comments, that Toronto should disassociate itself from the Trump brand altogether and strip the word Trump off that hotel, Trump Tower.
Those are positive, symbolic gestures by politicians. They capture good headlines. What kind of impact it'll really have on reshaping the impact of his words on people who are looking for those kinds of remarks to validate their perspectives? I don't know.
Evan, I think, like Rabia said, these are all great gestures, but I really hope we would use these kinds of events to actually begin to address the root problems here, and that is the level of bigotry and level of that people are uneducated about Islam and about Muslims. This is what needs to be addressed, and when we condemn this, at the end of the day, okay, well, everyone's going to shout him down. But you know what the lesson is going to be? It's not politically correct. And actually, they're using that in the discourse about the San Bernadino shooting. They're saying, due to political correctness, and I was in the U.S., and Fox News is on TV everywhere there, due to political correctness, these Americans were killed by Muslims. And it's not the first time. These are actually quotes I've heard on national television over there. So we don't want this.
Well, let me play you one. This is Trump. Trump himself invoked the politically correct mantra.
Yeah.
Here's Donald Trump saying that exact thing.
It's going to get worse and worse. You're going to have more World Trade Centers. We can be politically correct and we can be stupid. Until we are able to determine and understand this problem and the dangerous threat it poses, our country cannot be the victim of horrendous attacks by people that believe only in jihad. These are people who only believe in jihad. They don't want our system. They don't want our system.
You know, I don't know who he's referring to as these are people. All Muslims or Islamists, but clearly we now know that it's all Muslims because that's who he wants to ban, Rabia. All Muslims. Now, the problem here is his comments are so outrageous, so hurtful, but you can no longer have a thoughtful discussion about real issues. You can no longer have a discussion about ISIS or Saudi Arabia or fundamental problems or racism and bigotry, because what he's done is he's created such a horrific line. And I think the thing to watch for is, and he's already threatened this, does this make him irrelevant? He's threatened to leave the Republican Party over the reaction on this. And if he becomes a kind of populist, disconnected from the mainstream party, he will dissipate. He will dissipate. He could be dangerous, but he will dissipate. But Rabia, if he stays in the party, that's even more dangerous.
We hope he dissipates. I'm not too sure about that, to be honest with you. What I'm seeing happen on the ground, whether post his remarks or pre his remarks, is this type of sentiment is being talked about at home, and that is having an impact on the playground, on the schoolyard, amongst children, and that really, really concerns me as a parent.
Yes, and Evan, I'll go back.
Okay, I got a minute here, real quick.
I'll go back to history. It'd be very ironic if what Donald Trump, he's going to have to probably leave the Republican Party, and if he does, he can run as an independent, and it would be very ironic because he would then pull what Ross Perot did to bring Bill Clinton into the White House by defeating Herbert Walker Bush, by being that third candidate who would sap votes from the Republicans and weaken them even further, as if Hillary Clinton needed any more help. But having said all of that, Evan, the point I'm trying to make is we need to ask why this is wrong, not just say it's politically incorrect.
Mohamed El Rashidy, human rights and civil liberties lawyer, Rabia Khedr from the Federation of Muslim Women. I really appreciate your perspectives on this. Really important. I love our conversations. Come back again. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Evan. Thank you, Rabia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is, you just wonder how a political figure remains this relevant and says these kind of things. We'll be watching the Trump situation closely. I want to thank all of you for listening to us tonight. Frank Trachtenberg, Christian Drake, Yael Berger. I'm Evan Solomon. From all of us, thanks for listening.